Let's understand transform in CSS. In order to do so, let's first of all create a div with the class of container. Now let's style this container by targeting the container class and giving it a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels. Let's give it a background color of yellow once again, and we're going to save the document, and we'll have this yellow container at the top of our page. So let's get that one into the center of our page by giving our body a display of flex, justify items of center and align items of center, so we see everything a little bit better. And this one will have a height of 100 viewport height. So now this yellow box is in the center, and transform has a lot of different properties if you want to say so. So we can use transform by just typing transform, and now we have some different options like translate, scale, rotate, skew, or a combination of all of these options. So let's start by using translate. And there exists translate, translate X, translate Y, and translate Z. But you usually only use translate X or Y, or the shorthand property, which is translate. So let's start by using translate X. And as the name implies, you can translate the content on the X axis. So let's use translate X by 100 pixels, for example. And as you can see, our content moved a little bit to the right. So we could also say, let's go 100 pixels to the left. So 100 pixels to the left on the x-axis, and the same obviously also works for translate y. So we could say go 200 pixels along the y-axis, or we could go in the opposite direction and go 200 pixels or minus 200 pixels along the y-axis. The shorthand property is obviously just translate instead of translate x and y. So we could say go 300 pixels along the x-axis and go 200 pixels along the y-axis. And now we have this result basically. The next property is the scale property, which is pretty self-explanatory. You have a scale factor, normal is just 1. If you are bigger than 1, you are basically scaling up. So 1.5 makes the element a little bit bigger, and 0.5 makes the element a little bit smaller, for example. Rotate works pretty much the same. You just rotate an element. You can define degrees, for example. So you can, for example, say, let's rotate the element by 180, or let's make 45 degrees, because that would basically be visual at least. You could at least see the difference, I'd say. And if we are going to rotate by 90 degrees, you should not see a difference, but it's rotated by 90 degrees now. Next option is skew. So we can basically tilt our content, if you want to say so, by using skew, and we can again use degrees for that option. So we can, for example, say, let's skew our content along the x-axis again, if we want to, by 45 degrees. And as you can see, we skewed our content along the x-axis by 45 degrees. So obviously the same works for the y-axis again. And now our content is skewed along the y-axis. So the shorthand property is basically skew, where you can define a value for x, 40 degrees for example, and a value for y, 30 degrees for example. And as you can see, now our element is basically skewed. But that is something I've rarely ever seen, so most people don't use skew, but if you want to use that, you can. Obviously, you can also combine all of these properties, so you can, for example, say I want to translate 100 pixels into the x direction, 200 pixels into the y direction, then I want to scale by a scale factor of 1.5, and I want to rotate by maybe 45 degrees. And as you can see, we now have a combination of all of those transform properties. You can also change the transform origin, and that is also the reason why I wanted to have the element in the center of the page, because now it's a lot easier to show you the difference. So let's just use scale 1 for now, because that will not change anything, and I want to change the transform origin by using transform minus origin, and now I can set the origin to the top, to the left, to the bottom, or to the right. And I can also use a combination like top, left, for example. And this will basically just change the center, so the origin from where we apply those transformations. So now our origin is the top left. So if we are going to scale, we are going to start at the top left, because that is our anchor point, if you want to say so. And especially if you have some experience with video editing, you know what the anchor point is. So this is basically the anchor point. So now we are going to start to scale our image from the top left. And now if I'm going to increase the size, for example, let's take a look at this element. I'm going to save the document. And as you can see, we started to scale our element from the top left, and it's basically going down here. So it's basically going to start to scale from here into this direction. And if I'm going to use a scale factor of 3, you should see it even better. So the transform origin might something that might really be useful, or you might want to do under some circumstances. Obviously also if you want to rotate around the top left, for example, that would make a lot of sense. You could now, for example, say let's rotate by 180 degrees, for example, or 170, it doesn't really matter. And now you basically rotate around this anchor point. And that might also be really useful if you start to animate things. And that is all you need to know about transform in CSS.